Hello Jawas. Today we're going to build the control glove for your sound mask, or at least we'll build the electronic components for that glove. This is a completed unit and you can see it's pretty simple. There's a battery holder with an on-off switch, a transmitter, and then 4 buttons. This is a 4-channel transmitter, so each of these represents a signal that we can send to the sound mask to trigger an action, like to blink the eyes or to play a sound. So let's take a look at the components that we're working with. The buttons we get from 123 Electronics. The most notable things about these is that they are soft press momentary switches, and that the backing board has some nice holes that we can use to sew these onto gloves. Now this is a transmitter receiver set. These are available in quantity from AliExpress and sites like that, but you want to be careful to buy learning remotes. That is, all our remotes are identical, but they have to be paired together in order to work. These are a transmitter and a receiver, but as of yet, they don't know anything about each other. The pairing happens on the receiving side and is triggered by this little white button. Beware of remote control sets that are not working. They might work fine if it's just you, but if your fellow trooper has the same remote, you may end up triggering each other. Finally, this is the battery case we're working with. Nothing fancy here, just a button cell battery holder, though this one does have an on-off switch, which can save you some pain in case your glove gets squished in storage. You don't risk your battery being drained, that is, assuming you do remember to turn it off. Now, before we get to soldering, we've got some prep work to do. These buttons actually come with 12-inch leads, which is kind of unmanageably long for the sound glove. So instead, we are going to cut these short to about 6 inches and strip the insulation off the ends of one of the wires. We're also going to run each pair of leads through a little piece of heat shrink tubing. In this case, we're not actually doing that for electrical reasons, but just to keep the leads from each button together and make the final assembly a little bit more manageable. Finally, while these buttons are reasonably well made, these points where the wires connect to the backing board is a common point of failure. So I'm going to add some E6000 glue to these points just to give them a little bit of reinforcement. And here's our completed button prepared for soldering. We've got the leads cut down to about 6 inches. We've got a little piece of heat shrink tubing here, big enough for both wires to go through, and we've added some E6000 onto both sides just to make this a little bit more stable. Finally, we've got a little bit of wire exposed with the insulation removed. I'll set that aside to dry and do the other 3 buttons. Now we're also going to do a little bit of preparation on the button holder, cutting these leads to maybe 1.5 inches long or so. And for right now, let's just strip the insulation off of the positive power lead. Oh, and by the way, these wires that you have removed from the buttons, hold on to those, and we are going to use those for a later section of this project. All right, now we're going to start our actual soldering, or at least preparation for joining things together. The first stage is to actually add some tin to the components of the transmitter that we're going to be using. Now, we're just going to use the first six pins here. And we're also going to tin the ends of the wires. Okay, for the actual pins in use on this receiver, there's documentation on the back side printed onto the board, but we can't see that from this side. So I will just speak it here, and hopefully you'll remember when you're actually soldering. The first pin is our ground pin. That's where we're going to have negative power. Next is positive voltage, then buttons 1, 2, 3, and 4. The last pin is for an antenna, which we're not going to be using. So I'm going to be attaching all except the negative power here. And I'm always going to be adding a little bit of heat shrink tubing to each wire before I attach it, because we've got a lot of electrical things right next to each other here, and now we do need the isolation that the heat shrink is going to provide. Okay, the perceptive amongst you will have noticed that I forgot to add heat shrink to the last wire before I soldered it on. I have taken that off and put the heat shrink on it. I've moved the heat shrink up to the end, and I'm just going to go ahead and finalize those before we move on, just so that they stay in the right place. I'm going to add one final connection to the transmitter unit. I'm going to add a short piece. I've cut off about 1.5 inches of the negative wire, cut up a bit of the wire that we removed from the battery holder. I'm going to add that to the negative lead here. And please pay no attention to my soldering. There's folks online that are a lot better at this than I am. Learn from YouTube, not from me. Keep that on as well. And now all that remains is to gather all of these wires. I've bared the insulation off of the end of the button wires while we were off camera. I'm going to link all these together. And link them into what's coming out of the battery and what's coming off the receiver, and basically just get a big batch of, bring all our negative cables together. Now I do need heat shrink on this. So that we can cover it when we're done. Folks who are better than me would probably do this in a better way, but this should work for us. I slide the heat shrink over the connection, shrink that in place. Okay, we've made all of our electrical connections, heat shrunk them all together. I'm going to open the battery holder, add a CR2032 battery, close that up, turn the power switch on, and let's see if this actually works. Every time we press a button, we ought to see a light. All right, that's fantastic. It looks great. Our last step in this thing is mechanical. I'm going to just put a little tab of mounting tape on the back of this, and that will hold this to the battery holder and just keep things in a little bit of a nice shape. All right, and here is our finalized remote control unit, all ready to go and ready to be added to a sound glove.